thank you all for being here tonight. I realize, can you see? Should we peek out a little bit more? Okay. Yes, so I hope that it's all in your hearts to embrace that everyone here is supposed to be here, like Cindy said, with the crowd, and we are working on it, but really, thank you so much for coming tonight. I was thinking today about the whole thing that we're here to talk about deep things, think about deep things, and I thought about Rochelle, who had put me in touch with Saba. Is Saba here tonight? She was supposed to be here. So Saba and I, last summer, because Rochelle thought we would have a lot in common, we got together, we were at Pete's, and it was like an immediate deep dive. And what was important to us, and what we were trying to do with our lives, and all of that. And probably at about 3 hours in, or something like that, Saba went to get another tea. And the lady, when Saba got up, the lady who was sitting next to us reached out and started crying. And she said, people don't talk about things like that. She was so moved that we were talking about deep things. So Saba comes back 3 minutes later and she's like, what is going on here? So Everyday Deep is a place, like Pete's can be at times, to talk about deep things. So our theme tonight is Shift Happens. And don't let the cutesy little, play on it fool you, because we do know there are people who are going through some really hard things. I know some, and you may know some too. So this is not a 3 easy steps to shift. Again, these are real people telling their stories. But the fact is, for better or worse, change is about the only constant in life. And I don't know about you, but I find that a little unsettling, sometimes more than others. But I don't want to get stuck in the past, right? Do you? And I don't want to be afraid of the future. So my options are peeling away there. To really go with the flow of life, I think is really what we all want. It's the how, do we do it? So our speakers tonight are going to talk about the concept of shift and the calling to shift and the power of shift. And all three of them are authors. And I normally wouldn't put 3 authors together, but they really have 3 very different perspectives. And actually, one is a professional writer. Jan Deal is a short story writer and novelist. And Riley Hunter Cooper is a novel, as in new writer, who wrote about her life story. And Margot Tirado is talking from her professional experience. And, it makes sense that the word author is related to authority, right? And so whether it's command over the English language or your life experience or your profession. And it was cool, I found out, I'm a total word geek, I've said that before, but the root meaning of author means one who causes to grow. So, yeah, it does. So Jan and Riley and Margot are gonna help us grow and move and shift tonight. So our first speaker is Janice Deal, a novelist and writer of short stories. And Jan says that her work helps her to navigate life and to really deal with this human condition. And like the characters she writes about, Jan is facing change in her own life. Her 16-year-old daughter is currently studying in China at a Kung Fu academy. So wrap your brain around that if you have kids. So Jan will share some of that story, some of the inspiration for her writing, and a little bit of her work. So please welcome Janice Deal.
Daryl, thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I thought a lot about today's theme of change, and it occurred to me as I was pondering this that change or shift, it's not only inevitable, it's also what I think of as a virtuous circle. And what I mean by that is that I feel like when we embrace, oh, here we go. Oh, no, yeah. You got it. Oh, this is the first slide, you guys. It's a virtuous circle. And so what I mean by that is that when we embrace one kind of change, we consciously or unconsciously unlock more change that feeds on itself and that can elevate us. Sometimes we invite that change into our lives, and sometimes it comes unbidden. We don't really want it or not. I'm just going to take a couple minutes to talk about how change has been a virtuous circle for me in my writing and in my life. I'm going to take you back to the early 1990s. I was an editor and writer at Where Magazine in Chicago, and that's a picture of me and my husband David looking super young at a Where party. At that time, to improve my skills on the job, I took a journalism class at Northwestern. And the class went well, and I realized it felt great to be back in an academic environment. So after the class wrapped up, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna, just for a flyer, for fun, I'm gonna take another class. So I took a fiction writing class at Northwestern. And if I liked the journalism class, oh my gosh, you guys, I loved the fiction class. After it wrapped up, the instructor, Fred Schaefer, he invited me to be part of a short story workshop that he runs out of his home on Saturdays up in Evanston. That workshop opened up a whole new world for me. I think it unlocked an artistic side that I wasn't fully aware was there. I love writing. And I didn't work quickly then, I still don't. At the time, I had a full-time job, and at a certain point, I went back to school and I got a master's in library science. But the writing became a really foundational part of my life. So no matter what else was going on, I just kept plugging away and writing stories at about the rate of one a year. As my friend Diane would say, just keep rowing the boat, right? So I started to send my stories out, and in the late 90s, they were getting published in literary magazines. Now, as it turns out, becoming a writer and starting to get published, you get more confident to embrace other change. And, that virtuous circle of change. In 97, David and I decided to embrace a major change. We left our condo in the city and we started looking at houses in the suburbs where we thought we could nurture a different side of our life. We ended up buying this sort of quirky 1920s bungalow. It has lots of nooks and crannies. And our house became a place to fill with books and art, eventually cats. And for me to really foster the artistic side that I've been discovering as a writer. I started writing more, and with more writing came more recognition. In 2000, I got an Illinois Arts grant, and I took a sabbatical from my job at the DePaul University Library. David and I traveled to Paris, and in those pre-Airbnb days, we found this cool woman, and she sublet her apartment, and we just lived in Paris, and we walked around, and we explored the city, and we ate great food, and we wrote, and it was kind of awesome. And in Paris, we found some more inspiration in Paris. When we came back to Chicago, to Downers Grove, we were like, you know what, we would really, really like to start a family. And now I have to share here that I had an old grad school mentor who had warned me. Number one, he said, if you move to the suburbs, and if two, you get pregnant, he was like, that's it, you're never gonna write again. Right? I mean, how hideous. But fortunately, I'm a super stubborn person, and I also have other counselors in my life. This individual was not the only person who was giving me advice. I remember how my friend Anna, who is an artist and a parent, she told me that, on the contrary, motherhood would open up new vistas, the virtuous circle of change, in other words. And you guys, she was deeply right. That's Marion and David. And I can say being a mom changed me as a person. Suddenly I was responsible for another human being. And with this immense responsibility, I think came a greater understanding of, the fragility and just epicness of her humanity. In other words, being a mom opened up new feelings and emotions that I drew upon to write more stories and develop new characters. Now, just to be clear, in my work, I don't write directly from my own life, but being a parent definitely inspired me to write about topics like the relationship between a parent and a child in, I think, a more authentic and intuitive way. Now, unfortunately, at this point in my life, a difficult change visited me and my extended family. Both my parents became seriously ill. And we're a close family, and I had always enjoyed a really warm relationship with my mom and dad. Marion, in fact, she's named after my mom. And here's a picture of me and mom and dad and Marion. Now mom and dad were embarking on an epic and scary journey as they navigated respectively the onset of dementia and cancer. And I learned that it's one thing to know about illness and death on a conceptual level. I touched upon some of these things in my writing. As a writer, as a human being, you can imagine things, but it's quite another to have these things happen to you and to those you love. I came to understand firsthand what it means to be in the trenches with this kind of loss. Now, I've always been interested in the way change and loss affect one's life. I mentioned, even before this, I'd written about these themes in my work. But the declining health of my parents really made these topics more visceral for me. And in consequence, I think the emotional core of my work strengthened. I don't write from my life directly, but I do write about what I understand about human experience. And my human experience was suddenly delivering loss and change on the grand scale. I was being invited to absorb what was happening and to cope with it. I think when we're visited by challenges of any kind, it's an invitation to grow. We can grow from something, sometimes in unexpected ways, or maybe we don't. But I'm really interested in that opportunity, how it manifests itself in life, and I explore that in my work too. In any case, in real life, my writing helped me process the changes that were kind of coming at us from all directions. My writing grew as I grew, because as I embraced being a mom, and I tried to help my folks navigate their declining health, and I tried to grow that empathy that's in all of us, there was that virtuous circle again. As my life experience and perspective shifted and expanded, I think my writing got better. It got more real. Now, just to give you a sense, when my mom was in the last stage of her life, I became acutely aware of how death is really a solitary journey. It's literally an experience each of us must needs make by ourselves. Shortly after my mom died, I began work on a story that had to do with a widow experiencing loneliness. Writing the story helped me acknowledge the truth about the loneliness of death and its aftermath. And even though the story held some discoveries and ended up exploring themes that had nothing to do with my journey, I think its genesis and the act of writing it also helped me process how I was feeling about the loss of my mom. That acknowledgement is important in and of itself, but writing the story in a form that others could read was also important, because the story, just in its themes, underlines the universality of death, and writing it just made me feel connected to the larger human experience. One thing I've learned over the years is that the act of writing itself helps me make sense of change and accept it. Writing a short story for others to read creates within me like a sense of solace, because I'm connecting with others, even if I often don't know who's reading my work or how they react to it personally. Now, I should note here that there's power in documenting change, even if one doesn't consider oneself, a writer, whatever that is. Pausing to express what's going on inside can be just a brilliant way of articulating how one perceives and deals with change. In any case, as my writing got better, I got published in more magazines, and I eventually felt emboldened to try something new. That is, to collect my stories into a book. I was told by some that this would be a Herculean, if not impossible task, because bottom line, you guys, short story collections, with rare exceptions, do not make publishers money. Or writers. And it was indeed hard, but eventually my work did find a home with an indie press called Queen's Ferry, and my story collection, The Decline of Pigeons, came out in 2013. And remember my encouraging friend Anna, who was like, yeah, motherhood is awesome. It is one of my joys. Her artwork is on the cover of my book. So today I continue to write. I've completed a novel, and it's out at about 8 publishers. So, you know, big fingers crossed. I'm also working on a collection of linked short stories. One of those stories got published last year. I'm hoping more publications will come. And eventually I'd like to compile those stories into another book. Now, I should note here that because I send a lot of stuff out, you know, there's the novel, there's the news stories, rejection is very much a part of my journey. Sometimes on a daily basis, no lie. Sometimes though, I'll get what I think of as like lovely personal rejection letters. And I wanted to share one, because I know that's weird. You know, it's a real low bar when you're like, yeah, rejection letter. But anyway, this is one I got recently. Dear Janice, thank you for sending us String Theory and Other Animals. That's one of the news stories. We really liked reading this, in spite of the fact that it is so very bleak. I felt for everyone in the story, and they felt very real to me. All in all, I was moved and a bit shaken by this story. Okay, so this is lovely, you guys, because first of all, it's not a form letter, and I get plenty of those. But this one also came from a person, you know, writing to me as a person on a very human level, and I was really pleased because even though the magazine didn't take my story, I could see that my story had an impact. And that's what we aim to do as artists, you know, to connect, maybe even shift someone's perspective. And you know, writing just brings me joy. It's part of who I am. I've said for a long time that it's my work and that it informs me the way being a mom has informed me. And finally, circling back to motherhood, being a mom continues to be a journey of its own. Over the years, David and I have always encouraged Marion to be her own person and to embrace change. And that's turned out to be the case. That's her path. Before she goes to college, she's on a gap year. She's on her own adventure right now, studying Kung Fu in China at a place called the Tianmen Shaolin Academy in the coastal mountains of Shandong province. So she learned about the academy from a good friend who attended there in 2017, and it's just been an amazing adventure. Students at the academy, they range in age from 16 to folks in their 60s, and they go for all different reasons. Some folks go just to embrace physical fitness. Marion has a friend, Fabio. He's in the Swiss military, and he went solely to become more physically strong. Other folks go to the academy to explore the spiritual aspects of Kung Fu. Marion is interested in the mind-body connection. When she goes to university in the fall, she's going to be pursuing this multidisciplinary course of study with brain and cognitive neuroscience. And for her, the Kung Fu has been a brilliant way to braid the physical and the spiritual together in a concrete way before she begins her coursework. She's currently working with something called a zhen, which is like a double-edged straight sword, and her instructor, Hua Shifu, has told her the zhen of all the weapons requires the most spirit. And she loves the zhen. She's told me that, like, if she had to have 3 tools in life, it would be the zhen, the pen, and the knitting needle. So her teacher's description made her feel really good. She works really hard. The students train Mondays through Fridays. And on weekends, they can read, relax, they explore. There's a group of them that play Dungeons and Dragons. And she's made friends from all over the world. Austria, Poland, China, France. She's also been accepted into a Buddhist studies program in Kathmandu. And so the plan is that she's going to pursue that coursework this summer before she heads to university in the fall. We miss her. and she misses us. But this is so her path. When she first proposed to us that she might graduate high school early and take a gap year, and then when she proposed the idea of studying Kung Fu in China, I think it's safe to say that David and I, our thought balloons were kind of like, wow. And then, oh, this is so you, kid. And then seriously, once we looked into the academy and we talked to her friend Kenzie, who'd attended, we felt really strongly that this was a cool opportunity, one that Marion is really suited for. And we also felt that we could hardly tell her her whole life, oh yeah, kid, be independent, forge your own path, and then be like, oh yeah, no. And we see how this change, this adventure, is key to her development as an artist and a human being. She's a poet, and since leaving for China, she's had 3 poems accepted for publication in literary journals. And as her parents, it just brings us a lot of joy to see her following her own path. It's too early to tell, but I suspect that the change her exodus has wrought may inform my work. It has already informed my life. Our family made a leap of faith, and Marion is now continuing the virtuous circle. Change is going to continue to happen to her. It's going to happen to me. It's going to happen to everybody in this room. I like to think that if we embrace it, change, both the change we love and the change we fear, can unlock more change that brings about real growth. I'm just going to close with a passage from my story Dinosaurs, which deals in part with the role that change can play in our lives. Change can be scary, but it also has beauty. So, from Dinosaurs. We bought ice cream from Marsden and Therese, and Gil and the Hawkins and I took our cones stuck with wet paper from the wrappers onto the sweltering front porch. We held them out over the rail, the drips catching in the grass below. Just beyond was a canal filled with water as dark as tar. Birds with straw legs shrieked and walked through that dark water. We would never be this close again, the 4 of us. I think I knew that even then. We stood in a row as if the days, the years left to each of us would not take us in separate directions, and the strange birds of that place called to us as we were, shoulders almost touching, united in our magnificent isolation. Thank you.
Don't knock anything over. Jan, thank you so much. That was lovely. And I was wondering about the title of your book, which is called
The Decline of Pigeons.
Yeah. Tell us about what does that mean?
Okay, it's
Yeah, take that.
It's actually, I have my friend Sue Tate to thank for the title. I'm really bad at titles, and so originally the collection was called Aurora and Other Stories, and we have a very dear friend in Canada, and he was visiting, and he sat me down and he didn't want to hurt my feelings. You know, he's Buddhist and he's so kind, and he's like, Jan, have you thought about maybe naming your store, your collection something else? And Marion was walking through and she's like, yeah, Mom, I know you can do better than that. So I talked to my friend Sue, and it's actually drawn from one of the stories in the collection. And I thought it captured, a lot of the stories in the collection have to do with loss, and I thought it captured that essence.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions for Jan? Anything? Yeah, Heather.
So how has the change in the internet and everything, how has that changed being published?
Okay, the question was, how has the advent of the internet changed being published? I think that it has opened up a lot of different opportunities. I'll confess that I still kind of go the old school route, which is to contact publishers, and because I work on a lot of story collections, I'll send stories out to magazines and try and build up, a series of publications so that, a publisher will be like, yay. But I think that with the internet, self-publishing is an option. Amazon makes it very possible. I have a friend who had a brilliant, you guys, short stories are a hard sell, and she had stories in her collection that had won awards, and she could not find a publisher. And so she self-published her collection, and she used the internet. Really, she's awesome woman in her 70s, one of the most tech-savvy people I know, and she used, Instagram and Facebook, and she uses all these electronic tools to put the word out. So
So are you selling to online publications as well?
In terms of literary magazines, yes, I'm definitely open to that, because a lot of the lit mags are, or they no longer have print. A print form. Some of them have both, so.
So you've had obviously great success, but you also mentioned like you're almost daily, sometimes daily rejection. So in the face of that, when you're in that really dark place of rejection, what keeps you going?
The question is, in the face of sometimes constant rejection, what does one do? I have a toolkit. It includes my friends and my fam. I go for long walks, and I also think, you guys, if the only reason I was writing was just to get published, I would be glum a lot of the time. Yeah, I will tell you, Diane knows this story. I do sometimes get rejections every day. And one day I did text David, and I said, I got 5 rejections today. So he took me out for dinner. But anyway, I think there are a lot of reasons for writing. And as my friend Fran once said, you write because you must. And it's true. And I know when I'm working on something, when I'm working on a story, or I'm thinking about a new novel right now, one lives in a very heightened sense of sensitivity. And so, and one of the things in my writing, a lot of my characters are pretty mundane. And, but sometimes the most quiet, like eating ice cream, quiet, mundane moments have real depth and beauty. And when I'm working on something, oh my gosh, you guys, everything is in Technicolor. David and I were like driving home from the Twin Cities, and it was right after that big snow, and it was so freakishly bizarre, but there was no one out because there had been all this snow, and there must have been a truck or something, because there were all these rocks all of a sudden in the middle of the expressway, and David's going like 70, and all of a sudden he's like, oh my God, rocks! And he's like swerving, and so, that was weird, and I think it's gonna be in a story. So that's it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, please.
How much of your day do you spend writing? Do you write
I wanted to know that too, yeah.
What is your schedule?
I wish I could say I was like Hemingway, because he was like a badass, and he was like, yeah, I write from like 8 in the morning till 4 at night. Well, with me, it's different every day. And I do have a day job. I'm a freelance writer, and so,
Wait, tell them what for.
Oh, yes, one of my clients is an awesome organization called ESME, which is empowering super moms everywhere. It used to be single moms, and now it's all moms. And I write profiles for them, and I write articles, so that's a lot of fun. But so, you know, there are days when, and I have other clients too, and so there are some weeks when I'm like, you know, heads down, you know, doing the freelance, and that's good because there's a mortgage to be paid. And I also just really like the work. But I usually, at the beginning of the week, I try to kind of block out my week, and I'll sort of look at it, and I'll be like, okay, I know I have this deadline on Wednesday, so I'm gonna be heads down freelance Monday and Tuesday. But Thursday I'm gonna set aside just to write. Or I'm gonna meet a friend and walk because that really gets my, you know, that really gets the creative juices flowing. I have a couple trusted readers, and sometimes we'll meet and we'll talk about my work. So that's sort of a non-answer, but every week is different. It kind of depends on what's going on.